You're listening to the Speaking Tongues podcast. I'm your host, El Charisse. Each week, I sit down to a conversation with multilinguals where we discuss and celebrate language, life, and culture through our own perspectives. Episode 132, Speaking Gujarati. Hello, language lovers. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Speaking Tongues, the podcast in conversation with multilinguals. This week, we're talking with Babita Patel, a humanitarian photographer and founder of the KIOO Project, about her language of Gujarati. In this episode, Babita talks to us about her very international life and growing up speaking Gujarati in her home and community in New Jersey. We talk about some of the features of Gujarati that she finds fascinating, including a lack of curse words, and how she's noticed language changing through generations. I should mention that Babita is an incredible storyteller, and she talks to us about a visit she made to Nepal and a chance encounter on the holy Ganges River that led her to her humanitarian purpose in life. She tells us about the KIOO Project, which is on a mission to change gender dynamics in economically challenged communities through photography. And we also learn the funny story of how KIOO came to be named. Big thank you to Babita for sharing your stories, your adventures, your language, and culture with all of us. If you enjoy this episode of Speaking Tongues, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the Speaking Tongues podcast on Apple Podcasts, and like and subscribe on YouTube so that other language lovers like ourselves can find the show. If you've been a longtime listener of the show or even a recent listener, you can now pledge ongoing support for the show on buymeacoffee.com or on patreon.com. Special shout out to Speaking Tongues' recent supporters and patrons Heidi L, Linnea H, Pat N, and Jari A. For just $5 a month, you'll have access to excerpts from this conversation that did not make it to the full published episode. And as you know, I wrote a book. My food zine of international language and cuisine, Taste Buds Volume 1, is available now for purchase. Check social media for the sneak peek inside the book and make sure you purchase one for yourself and one for your friends. Links to all platforms are in the show notes. Okay, let's chat. Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Tongues. I'm here today with Babita. How are you today, Babita?
I'm doing great considering it's a rainy day, but I'm feeling good.
Yeah, I'm so happy that we met, number one.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so happy that we've had this chance to connect. And thirdly, I'm so happy to talk to you about your languages and your culture and all the work that you do. I like to start each episode with the same question, and that is, what is your first language and which languages have you learned to speak?
So my first language I spoke is actually a language called Gujarati, which is one of the languages in India. It's probably one of the bigger languages in India, and that has since been exported out with the diaspora. And I learned English probably when I started going to kindergarten, started going to school. I'm sure I was watching cartoons before then, but I definitely just remember speaking Gujarati at home. My family lived in this amazing apartment, now that I'm thinking in hindsight, in Union City, which is just across the river from Manhattan, kind of next to Jersey City. And we lived on the 17th floor of an apartment building with views of the Manhattan skyline. Like literally nothing blocked it. And we had a balcony. Like it's a $5 million view, And I still have memories of me walking around this apartment saying my numbers in Gujarati, like ek betran, and then I'm sure I was watching Thundercats and stuff like that in the apartment. But yeah, Gujarati is my first language. Since then, I've picked up Spanish when I was in high school. And I was actually fluent by the time I graduated in high school. I remember debating war and politics and government stuff with my teacher. I lost a lot of it since then, but if I'm in a Spanish speaking country, it starts to come back. It's supremely broken at this point, but I'm sure if I ended up living in a Spanish speaking country, it would probably come back a lot better. And because of my travels, I always pick up words, whatever country I'm in, what languages I speak. I picked up a little bit more Portuguese, simply because I was dating someone who spoke Portuguese, which always helps. And Portuguese is so similar to Spanish that like reading it, especially like half the words are the same, the accent's different. So I could kind of figure out what's going on. And also Hindi, I would kind of know in general because it's so similar to Gujarati. It's kind of like the Romance languages. Like if you know Portuguese, you know Spanish, vice versa. Kind of the same thing where if you know Gujarati, half the words are the same in Hindi. And so I don't speak Hindi, but if when it's being spoken, I probably can understand 60 to 70% of it, depending on the person and their accent. Like sometimes someone will speak, I'm like, I cannot pick up one word that this
Wow.
person is saying in Hindi. Another time, like there's another woman that one of my mentors, when she speaks in Hindi, I understand like 95% of what she says.
Hmm.
So
That's
it
so
just,
interesting. Like the more I talk to people from India and people from South Asia, I regardless of whatever their first language is, I always think it's interesting that they can understand Hindi either because their language is similar enough to Hindi or through Bollywood and through movies.
yeah. So when my parents got married, my father knew Gujarati because again, that's a language that our family speaks. He didn't really know Hindi because he didn't grow up in India. And then my mom, who grew up in India, spoke Hindi and Gujarati and everything. And so when they got married, they were living in London. And then, when they moved to America, she would force my father to watch Hindi movies. And back then it was like on videotape and there's no like subtitles. And so my father's now actually fluent in Hindi because he watched Bollywood movies with my mother after getting married. So
That's so
it's totally
cool.
possible to pick up a language just by watching it on TV.
I picked up one song from a Bollywood movie about 20 years ago, and I watched the clip the other day. It was Kaho Na Pyare Hai,
Mm-hmm.
and I watched it like 100 times when I was like in high school, and I learned the lyrics to this whole song. And I watched a clip like recently, and I don't remember anything from it, but I was still like, it brought back really good memories. I wanted to ask, you said you were living in New Jersey, you spoke Gujarati at home. What about in your community? Were there other Gujarati speakers, or were there speakers of other Indian languages that you had familiarity with, or you shared community with?
So the interesting thing is that Gujaratis tend to have like stay very, very insular in their community. And especially if you're a Patel, which, that's my last name. And so in within the Patel people, there's a caste system kind of thing that's happening or not happening, carries over from the old country. And so you stay even within your caste level. And it's also kind of goes back to a little bit of like economics and immigration, where when people in the 60s and 70s were immigrating from India, when after the Immigration Act was passed, you had to be wealthy or somewhat wealthy in India in order to leave India and come to America.
I see.
Frankly, just paying for the plane ticket alone, like that's not a cheap thing to pay when you're paying in Indian rupees. And so it tended to be, only certain parts of India would migrate, or in certain caste levels would migrate, because you had to have the wealth in order to do that. And Gujaratis tended to be one of the bigger populations that would immigrate from India. And so there was just a big population of Gujaratis in Jersey because of the migration kind of system that was in place. And you obviously go to where you already have community built in when you don't know anyone. When I grew up with Indians, they tended to be family or friends of my parents, mostly my mother, back in India, that all have migrated
Oh,
over.
cool.
And so because it was one of those things where like when my family came here, my mother would call up a girlfriend that she went to college with who's already here. And so then you like meet up with them, and then they would have obviously kids that were my age and you'd play together and stuff like that. So yeah, so we had a big, strong sense of Indian community, Gujarati Patel community in Jersey growing up in the 80s and early 90s.
I love that. I
Yeah.
love that. It must feel like an extended family, like a massive extended family in some ways.
Yeah, and well, yes, and also all the annoyances that could come with something like that.
Of course.
Obviously, I grew up with my mother's one of five siblings, so all of the siblings were lived in Jersey, and there's 10 cousins. Like that is an extended family right there, and built-in family time. But then all of a sudden, like you start going outside of that of like what we call the aunties and uncles, it's like whether they're blood related or not, they're community related, and so then all of a sudden you have to have a set decorum and what you do, because obviously what would happen, like if the auntie found out you did this, like what would the auntie say, what would the uncle say, and like it's like all this community pressure to like be held to the standard, and what happens if you don't hold up to it, or you just get pitted against another kid or girl your age for that reason. So it's great, but also there's challenges to it as well.
Yeah. Oh. I have a small family, so I've always, the grass is always greener, I think. And I've always looked at like people that have like 5, 10 first cousins and stuff like that. And I'm like, oh man, it's like the way I see it, it's like you have like built-in friends for life. But as you said, and I completely agree with you, like there's more to that. So it's not just,
and I'm not slamming. I definitely do. I'm friends with my cousins and all that kind of stuff. And there's shared community and that, and memories, so many memories growing up with them.
Yeah.
Some of my favorite Hindu holidays involve them and stuff, but there's also the other aspect to it, which is not so great.
Right. So I know that you have led such an international life and you have been all over the world. How have you been able to stay close to your Gujarati roots, the language itself, your heritage and things like that? Like, is it through celebration? Is it through anything really? I don't want to, lead the witness, but
objection. What the interesting thing I think is that because Gujarati is such a cornerstone, obviously, in my life and growing up and my family, and along with that comes like culture and food and religion and family. I think there's so many parts of the world that also have that similar aspect to it. So whether or not we speak the same language or worship the same gods or whatnot, when someone speaks about their own family and life and culture and growing up, I can still relate to it because it's like, oh, that sounds similar, So like part of one of the projects I do for my work, I put out a print magazine of stories for girls by girls from all over the world. It's really exciting. We cover themes like menstruation and climate change and mental health and freedom. And so we were just interviewing a girl who's going to be on the cover story, one of the cover story girls for the freedom issue. And she's Native Hawaiian, which was the first time I ever really learned like a remote thing about Native Hawaiian culture. And the way when she was speaking of the stuff that her family does in terms of like the land and the gods and goddesses and how they communicate with them, it just felt so familiar to me because of the way I practice Hinduism, the teachings of Hinduism, and like the learnings that I'm getting from like this guru that I followed in Mumbai. That it was funny because when she was like sharing some of her things, I think she thought that it would be I would find it odd or not be able to relate to what she was talking about. I was like, no, honey, like, I totally get it. Like you change the words and then it's what I would say, or like the names of the gods or something, So I kind of find like, I love that. And then I think it makes me a little bit more open and empathetic to hearing someone else's story, because I know I probably can find similarities in my own story with what they're sharing.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like, that's one of like the cornerstones really of this show is just trying to find common ground with people, because it's so easy to separate us and pull us apart and like, you do this, but we do that better. And like, no, like strip it all away. And there's so much similarity that we all have in common. So I'm glad that you get to see that firsthand and experience that firsthand. And I wish everybody could really. I think we'd all be better if we could, find ways to communicate and just see other things, other than what we know.
I think even if someone doesn't have a quote unquote other culture or language that they speak or something, if you just go into a conversation with curiosity or openness, like you will still find something to connect with, or you'll learn something that's so unique and different than your own experience that you're all of a sudden connected because of that, you
Right.
know. So it just, you won't find just connections from the similarity, you'll also find it from the differences, as long as you're willing to be open and seeing
Right.
that.
Absolutely. I feel like we are kindreds in this aspect.
I love it.
Let's go back to language for a second, to
Mm-hmm.
Gujarati. And personally, I feel like I'm putting an extra syllable when I say Gujarati, and I'm trying to speed it up. I'm trying to get better at pronouncing it. So bear with me.
Can I give you a hint or a tip about this?
Yes, please do.
So this is one of the most frustrating things with Indian words and languages in translating into English letters or words, written language. I don't know who did it. I'm just going to blame the British because they screwed up India enough that I'm just going to blame this on them too. So I don't know who did it though. A lot of the letters in Indian languages, Hindi, Gujarati, all of them, have like a soft A sound, kind of like English letters having soft E sound. So like the letter B or D is like DEE if you were to write it out. Not that when you write the word out, you use those E's when you write it out. For some reason in Gujarati or Hindi, you know, the soft A sound, it's there. But when they wrote it in English, they added the A. Like you would have added the E if you used the letter D in a word. And so that's why, like, sometimes there's a lot of extra A's or some words that just are like full of A's because for some reason someone wrote those A's out, even though you wouldn't necessarily pronounce it as an A. So, like, I think Gujarati, it's spelled with an extra A. So it's like the Gujarati. If you cut out that first A, it's almost like you cut out that extra syllable that you're talking about. So it's like Gujarati, you know?
Gujarati.
Yeah.
Gujarati.
There you go.
Gujarati.
Yeah.
I'm getting there.
Sometimes you need the A, sometimes you do, but like I feel like half the time you probably can cut out the A and it would just sound better.
I appreciate that because like I always say, like I'm happy to be wrong because it means I get to learn. So
Yeah.
thank you for helping me with that. And I
My
do
pleasure.
not want to offend anybody. So I hope that nobody's offended.
Nah.
But speaking about Gujarati, tell me some things about Gujarati that make it stand out. Things that you've noticed, and as you know, we made a comparison to Hindi, but as we know, there are so many languages spoken in India. So what to you among the other languages that you've heard, like what makes Gujarati stand out? I guess maybe if you, and I like to kind of phrase it like in this way, if you're overhearing a conversation and the question is, okay, is this Hindi or is this Gujarati? Like, what makes you know that it's Gujarati?
Probably because of Gujarati, I understand 100% of it. Hindi, I don't. So like I can easily pick up like how much of this do I understand. It's also interesting. Like I think when I hear Gujarati or Hindi, spoken like interchangeably, but at the same time, my mind doesn't say, oh, that's Gujarati, that's Hindi. It's just like what I'm understanding, So the interesting, like obviously my parents taught me Gujarati, my mother more than my father, because that's who I would speak it with. And it's not like my mother would ever sit me down going, and this is how you curse in Gujarati. This is how you say shit. And this is how you say fuck. And, like, no, that just never happened. And so usually when you learn a new language, like cursing is usually the first thing you learn. And so I just don't know any Gujarati curses. And I just thought it's because my mother never taught me. And then, rightfully so. And then my cousin from Mumbai moved to America, and I was with him, and obviously he's fluent in all the languages, Indian languages. And so I was asking him, I'm like, hey, how do I curse in Gujarati? Because mom never taught me. He's like, well, that's the weird thing. He's like, there's really no curses in Gujarati. I'm like, what? Every language has curse. He's like, no, it's kind of like a pure language and like such a nice language, and there's really no like harsh cursing in it. And I was like, how is that possible? And I was like, is there cursing in Hindi? He's like, yeah, of course. I was like, wait, what? Like, how does one language have cursing and the other one doesn't? And both are derived from Sanskrit, And so he taught me how to curse in Hindi, but I've since probably forgotten it because I don't use it like if I'm going to curse, I'm going to curse in English, not in Hindi. So I found that really interesting, but I was thinking about it afterwards. There are kind of words that you can say to when you frankly refer to a woman who that you might want to call a bitch, basically. But you would never, the word is not harsh enough to be like bitch. It's more of like she's a manipulative person, or female, like, or she's a conniving one, or she's a lying one. And so you basically use those words to sound like you're cursing versus like an actual curse word. And it's usually the inflection that you give it on the word that would say like, oh, she's a liar versus she's a lying bitch, you know? So I find that very interesting that there's no curses in Gujarati, which how is that possible? Like, how does someone curse if they're a Gujarati speaker and get like really angry?
But that makes me curious because if you're involving that kind of wordplay with such an intense emotion or such intent with such intensity, it makes me wonder how we express other emotions. Is it a language that's very colorful in its insults, in its praises, in its, tell us a bit about that if that does exist.
Like Gujarati, when you're saying something, it's very hard to translate it word for word into English for that meaning. But so like to say I love you, tane prem apun chu, translates to you love, I give. So like, it obviously that's you, like you wouldn't ever translate I love you like word for word. It's more of like a phrase and a meaning behind it, So it's a very colorful language in that way, because when you try translating it directly word for word into English, you're just like, what is that? It's such a like a unique way of phrasing what you want to say, And so it sounds colorful when you translate it, but it makes complete sense, obviously, when you say in Gujarati.
Have you noticed in your travels between, well, as you said, Gujarati culture is all over the world. Have you noticed the language change from place to place? Have you noticed different influences on the language from place to place and different ways that it morphs at all?
So it's interesting. I don't know if the place morphs the language. I think it's the different generations morph the language. So like, people who come directly from India, like immigrants, they obviously speak a much pure version of Gujarati, like the authentic one. And then as you become like first generation, even second generation, you kind of lose the ability to speak it perfectly. And so because you've kind of mixed in English to it. So whether it's speaking Goodrish, basically, like half Gujarati, half English. The other interesting thing is that the sentence structures of Gujarati is the complete opposite of English. If you were to say close the door in Gujarati, you would say bano band kar. And the way it translates word for word is door shut, you do. So it's kind of hard to change like sentence to sentence, Gujarati to English. So, and the only person in the world who understands this the way I speak it is my mother, because she's my mother. Like I would take like an English sentence structure and replace certain words in the English sentence with Gujarati words. So like close the door would be like close the banu, like, which makes no sense if you're a Gujarati speaker, makes no sense if you're an English speaker. But if you're me and my mother, makes perfect sense.
Did you have a lot of those moments like growing up where you were mixing, or, your cousins, your people in your community were like mixing the language and making your own language between English and Gujarati?
So it's interesting. I think technically I'm not first generation in America, but I am first generation for India because I was born in the UK and moved to America when I was 1. And among my cousins and I don't think we've ever spoken Gujarati to each other. We're always speaking English, unless we randomly are in public and we want to talk about people that are around us. And of course you switch to Gujarati in that way. But so like only with our parents do we really speak Gujarati. Sometimes you have to translate stuff like cultural stuff or stuff that happened at home into English because you're in a non-Gujarati setting. And so something that happened when I was in first grade, our teacher, like my teacher asked me like what I had for dinner the night before. And the night before I had Gujarati food. And there's one vegetable that's only found, I think even only in Gujarat or in like Western India, not even all of India, because I don't think everyone knows about it. But it's a little vegetable. It kind of looks like a mini little watermelon kind of shape kind of thing, but it's like really small, like an inch or two long. And then you cut it open, and then the inside's kind of, when you cook it, becomes gooey a little, or soft. I personally don't like this vegetable, but my mother loves it. And so, of course, when you're like 6 years old, you eat what your mother tells you to eat. And so I'm like totally annoyed and irritated I have to eat this thing. And the next day, my teacher's asking me like what I had for dinner. And because it's not like eggplant or something that translates to English, because it's not a vegetable found in America, I didn't know what to call it. The thing, though, is in Gujarati, it's called, the word for it, it sounds very similar to lizard. It almost sounds like a singular like lizard, but not completely. So in my 6-year-old mind, I was like, I ate lizards for dinner last night. And my teacher's like, what? I was like, she's like, you didn't eat lizard. I'm like, yeah, that's what we ate. Oh. She literally called my mother in for a parent teacher conference to be like, basically like Child Protective Services needed to be called. I don't know. Because she's like, what are you doing feeding your child lizards? And my mother's reaction was like, we're vegetarian at home. Like, I don't cook meat. Like, I would never serve my child lizards. And then she was like trying to think of like what she made. And then she was like, oh, the 6-year-old confused the words. Like, and so like she got me in trouble with the teacher.
What is it? What is it called?
So lizard is called gilori, and the vegetable is giloda. And so it almost like the way the vowels happen in Gujarati to make something plural or singular kind of thing, you almost could, in theory, as a 6-year-old, think that the singular version of gilori is a giloda, or like a male. Actually, sorry, I apologize. Like a male lizard is a giloda, which it's not. It's a vegetable,
right?
Like. So I didn't eat male lizards for dinner last night.
Oh my gosh. That's funny.
Yeah. Let me get my mother in trouble by my teacher.
That's very funny. So you are a humanitarian photographer. And you shoot all over the world, and you're very international. I'm gonna keep saying it like all throughout this whole episode, because I'm so in awe of your work and what you do. How did you get into this kind of work? Tell us, well, first of all, I mean, it's going to be in the intro of the show, but tell us what kind of work you produce, what kind of photos you produce, and what led you to this kind of work.
Yeah, so that's a interesting, slightly cultural answer. I actually went to art school and was an art director in advertising when I first graduated. So I was making TV commercials, print ads, billboards, radio spots, like all that kind of stuff for lots of big Fortune 500 companies. I loved the messaging of it. I didn't like it in practice. You know, this was 20 years ago. And so back then, especially the creative department was very white male dominated. A lot of Me Too stuff was happening before it was a Me Too thing. And, you know, when you're 24 years old, I was like, well, I guess this is supposed to be my lot in life. You know, like this is, it's part of the job. Obviously it's not, but what did I know? And so other things were happening, and I was just miserably unhappy with working in that setting. I was getting panic attacks for other reasons, and partly that reason. So, you know, life was a hot mess. And I was about to turn 30, and my mother and my aunt were going to Tibet. I didn't really know why she was going to Tibet. But like I said, like my life was a hot mess. And I was like, I want to go to Tibet. I love travel. I wasn't traveling as much back then because I couldn't afford it very well. I was too busy paying New York rent rather than paying for plane tickets. And so, you know, I was like, I want to go to Tibet. And my mother just like looked at me, and she knew the problems I was having, the challenges I was facing. And so she was like, you know what, for your 30th birthday, I will take you to Tibet. I was like, great. And I was like, afterwards, you know, I was like, by the way, what are we doing in Tibet? And so there's a holy mountain in Tibet, and it's holy to four different religions: Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and an ancient an ancient Tibetan religion whose name is escaping me at the moment. But for Hindus, it's where Shiva, one of the main gods, he lives. And so there's a Hindu pilgrimage that people take, and it's a 3-day trek around this mountain, 19,000 feet up it, you know, up. Yeah, exactly. And I was like, oh, so we're climbing around this mountain. My mother's like, yeah. I was like, okay, fine. You know, like done. And then I was like, and then afterwards I was like, well, what's going to happen at this mountain? Like, are we just walking around this mountain? Like, what's the deal? And so I don't know how much you know about Hinduism, but Ganesh, the elephant god, is Shiva's son. And so my mom was like, oh, well, people have said that they see Ganesh there. I was like, you mean the way people see the Virgin Mary in a piece of toast? Like, how crazy are we? Like, what do you mean people see a god while walking around this mountain, you know? And my mother's like, I don't know, like, just, pack your hiking gear and let's go. And so we go. And in my mind, I was like, oh, I'm going to go to this mountain. I'm going to see Ganesh. He's going to fix all my problems and done. Like life will be grand. Like all my problems will be solved by seeing someone at this mountain. And obviously that's not how it happens. Like the mountain, the experience was amazing, so powerful. I want to do it again if, I'm so blessed to. And the mountain, like when you look at it, one side of the mountain, it really does look like Shiva's face. Like
Wow.
It's really bizarre. Like his two eyes, his third eye, and like the bun that he has, like, it's his face. It's indescribable rather. And, we come off the mountain and I am a hot mess with high altitude sickness, which I couldn't take the medicine to combat it because I'm allergic to it. So I was like a vomiting mess all over the place.
Oh,
it was unpleasant, but beautiful to be there. And afterwards, after Tibet, we went back into Nepal, and then we get into India, and we're in Delhi, and then we go up the Ganges River, to Haridwar and Rishikesh, which are two like really holy places. I think the Beatles spent time in Rishikesh in the ashram there, like that's their thing.
Okay.
Or why Rishikesh is probably more known in the West. And we were in Haridwar, and our hotel is along the river, the Ganges. And it is a really, really fast moving river. Like you could stand on the banks of it and almost get motion sickness watching it flow by. And I am not someone who gets motion sickness. And yet like you can't stare at it too long because you literally get like a weird dizziness to it. And you can't even, there's parts of the river where they have cages built into the banks of it, because if you step into it, the flow is so strong, it'll just sweep you right away downstream. And so you go into the cage. So at least you're like, if you get swept down, you like literally bang into this metal cave a few feet down the river, instead of like ending up, hundreds of miles down the river.
Right.
And so the hotel we were staying in one morning, the hotel was like, oh, there's going to be a priest here. At sunrise, he's going to do a prayer ceremony thing. You can go join him if you want. And I was like, okay. And my mom was like, yeah, we'll definitely do that. So we woke up super early. We went and did the prayer ceremony. And it's one that I've done a million times before here in America, but just like never literally on the banks of the Holy River,
Wow.
And there's this whole like Hindu connection of a story of like the reason why the Ganges River is so fast flowing, and the source of it is the mountain I just climbed around in Tibet.
Wow.
And so there's a whole story of that, because Hinduism tends to be kind of like Greek mythology to explain like stories of the gods to explain like things in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And so the story is that there was a lot of sin on earth. And so all the gods had asked Ganga, which is a female deity, to come from the heavens to wash away the sin of the earth. But she was like, well, if I fall to the earth, I'm so, powerful that I'm going to split the world wide open. Like that can't be a thing. And so Shiva was like, well, come land on me at the mountain and I'll brace your fall. And that's why the source of the Ganges River is at this mountain that I just climbed around. And so there was like that weird connection of like where I'd just been and this river, And so after the ceremony, my mom was like, take the 2 steps down to the river because, there's all these ghats, which are steps to the river. And she's like, and pour water from the river onto this thing that's a statue that basically symbolizes Shiva, which is like recreating that story of like the Ganga falling on Shiva. And so I did that. And I, had my feet in the water sitting down so I wasn't swept away. And, I did the little thing that my mother asked me, and I closed my eyes and I was like, I just started praying. I was like, I need help. I'm a hot mess. Like, can Shiva, can you help me? Can you do anything for me? And, my eyes were closed, and I literally, Shiva appeared in front of me on the river, like basically just like floating on or standing on the river. And, he was speaking to me, but his mouth wasn't opening, but I could hear him, like his voice basically. And we just had a conversation of like, hey, you're okay. Like everything that you've been given, you've never been given anything that you can't handle. I've always been here for you, making sure that you're fine, just all this. And it was so powerful. And I felt like light and love. And it was just like an immense feeling, most powerful thing I've ever experienced. And eventually got so powerful that I like stepped away from it. And it was kind of like in the movies where like, everything like zooms back in, like all of a sudden, like I open my eyes and I see like the people on the other side of the river doing their morning prayers. The sun is rising over there. Feel the heat of that. The priest and my mother are behind me. Like all of a sudden I was like, wait, was that like 10 seconds, 10 minutes, an hour? Like I have no idea of time. And so like, and I'm crying. And so I go back to my mother and my mother like knows something happened, but like, she doesn't ask me anything. And we talked about it afterwards, my mother and I, but basically I came home to New York after that experience. And I was just like, okay, like I don't need to worry about me. Like someone else has got me. So who do I worry about, or what do I worry about? And I was like, well, I guess I'm supposed to worry about other people, helping other people. And so I took a look. I'm like, well, what in my career as an art director in advertising can I translate into helping people? And so, to combine everything that I love, like travel, photography, helping people, storytelling, messaging, international affairs, basically social impact stuff. And the term humanitarian photographer appeared on like the 10th page of Google, like some deep, dark parts. Because back then no one was really talking about humanitarian work as like a full-on career, and definitely not humanitarian photography. And so, so I came back and I was like, okay, I need to change my portfolio a little bit. Like at least I'm still in the creative world and all that kind of stuff. And I got some pro bono clients. And then eventually my clients started paying me to do the work. And I've been doing this for about 15 years almost now.
What a story.
Yes, that is a long story.
No, like my listeners cannot see me, but I'm like riveted by that story. And I think, well, let me thank you for sharing that, because I understand parts of it are deeply personal, but I'm like on the edge of my seat, like literally and figuratively, like, oh my gosh, I think that's like, I don't even have words. I really don't. I think that's tremendous. And I'm all I can say is I'm happy that you had that experience. That's like,
I fully acknowledge I am one of the blessed people in this world to have an experience like that, and to have not just the experience, but then also everything that came after it,
right.
That was a starting point of the work and the life I've been living for the past 15 years.
Yeah. A lot of us don't get to have such an experience that puts us on the path we need to be on. And wow. I'm rendered speechless. I'll be honest with you. And I'm just completely in awe of that. And wow. Just wow. That's all I have to say is wow.
Well, I'm glad that I shared it, even if it just resonates with you and no one else. I'm glad that it resonates, basically. I'm glad that I was able to share it with you.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Thank you. I got to keep moving, but I don't know. I don't know how.
Being speechless in a podcast doesn't quite work.
Doesn't help. But I want to talk about, with your work and with interacting with people who speak different languages, people of different backgrounds. And you talked a little bit about this before, but, being bilingual, how have you been able to form a deeper bond with the subjects that you photograph or with the organizations that you work with? Has it helped you in any way?
Again, I think because I'm so used to being, as my friend once recently told me, like a third culture. Like I'm not fully Indian, I'm not fully quote unquote American. I'm this like mix third culture, blend. When I go places, I recognize the fact that they could be living a third culture, or at least something different than what I'm used to, and because of that, I'm like able to relate to them. And sometimes actually some stuff like trickles over, So when I was in Kenya working, because of the British Empire, a lot of Indians moved to Kenya, and a lot of things have remained of Indian culture there. I mean, and also still Indians still live there. But a lot of like, for example, food obviously is very easy to, move over and translate. And the names of the food are the same. So a samosa is a samosa, pulao is pulao, like it's all the same. The funny thing though is when I was there, Indians don't, or Hindus don't eat beef, so the samosas are always vegetarian. Okay. And so when I was there was beef samosas. I was like, well, where's the vegetable one? And they're like, and the place I was in, they were like, there's no samosas don't have vegetables. I'm like, yeah, they do. They don't have beef in them, actually, And then I was like, okay, I guess I'm not eating samosas. And then the pulao was offered, which is like the rice, with like vegetables and spices. And again, it had beef in it. I'm like, where's the vegetarian version? And they were like, yeah, no, it doesn't come with just vegetables. I was like, yes, it does. So, it was a little frustrating that it was like I couldn't eat it, but at least I recognized the food. And so when I was with my students they went to school in a slum in Nairobi. And so during like lunch break or something, two of the girls want to go down the street to basically the food stand to get a snack. And I was like, oh, let me come with you. So I go with them, and the stand is like, just like a little wooden thing. The shopkeeper had an open fire outside the stand, and there was a covered pot, and she was cooking something on it. And so I was like, oh, what's in there? And the girls asked the shopkeeper. And speaking of an earlier part in our conversation, the girls were like, oh, there's gaderi in there. I'm like, I'm sorry, say what? And they're like, gaderi. Again, gaderi is female donkey to me. So everything else is the same. Samosa is a samosa, pulao is pulao, like, and I was like, are you, what is that though? They're like, gaderi. I was like, and then they're like, the girls were wondering why I was so confused. And finally I was like, to me, gaderi means female donkey. That's what's in there. And then they related to the shopkeeper, and the shopkeeper and them all started dying laughing, because gaderi is actually a mix of maize and rice. Oh, not meat, definitely not a female gaderi or a female donkey. And so I was like, oh, like in my mind, I was feeling like Godfather, like the head of the donkey is like in the covered pot. It was the funniest thing where like, oh, some words are the same and some words are not. Right. Vastly differently not. And I just found this out recently through the event that you and I met at. There's an Indian dish called kheer, and it's basically like rice pudding. It's made of rice and milk and probably sugar and stuff like that. And it's also a very holy thing because it's an offering you give to the gods or goddesses even, but you also eat it as a dessert or, and then I met this Persian guy, and he was like, yeah, in Persian, it basically means dick. And I was like, what? I was like, so this like rice pudding that we love, that's sweet and delicious and like refreshing, that we offer to the goddesses, literally has a vulgar like connotation in another language, So it's just like, of course.
I love those. I love when like it means something here, but it means something someplace else. Like those are endlessly amusing.
Yeah. Totally. Once you figure it out, because for a while there, you're like, wait, what? And then you're like, oh.
So tell me a bit about, you mentioned a little bit earlier, and you mentioned to me before we started recording that you, I'm going to say study with, but I'm not sure that's the right verb to use, with a guru in Mumbai. Do I say study with or worship with or follow? Okay. Yeah. Follow. You follow a guru based in Mumbai. I'd love to hear more about that. And I know that, well, first of all, let me just get this out of the way. I would love to get on a plane tonight to Mumbai. Like I would love it. And it just sounds like such an electric place and such a vibrant city. And I cannot wait to experience that someday. But I imagine that there are a lot of languages spoken in Mumbai. I mean, similarly to any metropolitan city, any big city. But I'd love to know, in your communication with your guru, and maybe other people who follow the guru, how is it like communicating, and what language is dominant, or does it matter at all? Like, what is communication like?
Yeah, so he speaks in Hindi and English, and he's actually also Gujarati, so he speaks Gujarati also. Um, the funny thing is, because my Hindi is not like perfect, he does translate stuff into English, usually for me when we have classes on Zoom and stuff like that. And the running joke in the organization is like, obviously I don't speak Hindi, so everything has to be in English for me. There are certain things where it's just not going to translate into English, like, so saying in Hindi makes more sense. And sometimes like they apologize saying that they can't say in English because the phrasing is not there, or there's no direct translation, or it gets lost in translation, frankly. Um, and so at those moments, like when they say it in Hindi, obviously I'm going to understand the gist of what's being said. Sometimes I understand everything that's being said or taught, but I've learned the way I see it in the Zen thinking of it all, that if I'm supposed to understand it, I will. So whether it's said in English or said in Hindi, like if I'm meant to understand it, I will. Like the communication barrier will not be there, And so certain times, like there's been something said and I don't understand a single word of it. I'm like, you know what? I wasn't meant to learn about it. It's totally fine, And then other times they asked me, like if something got said in Hindi, they're like, Babita, did you understand it? I was like, yeah, I actually did. Like I'm good. Like I got my lesson. Um, and so actually, because of that, and I've been following him for about 2.5 years, my Hindi has gotten much better. Like my understanding of Hindi. Again, I probably can say like 3 words, and I actually pretty much can say I don't speak Hindi, which helps when I'm shopping around in Mumbai and stuff. So it's actually been really great because I feel like my Hindi has gotten better because of following him. And when I'm in India, because I was just there in December, I think the cities at least have gotten much more cosmopolitan in the past, because I think the time before that it's been probably about 5 to 10 years since I've been there. They've gotten so much more cosmopolitan that a lot more people speak English. So in that way, it's kind of interesting and some people actually prefer to speak in English than Hindi there than you would expect. Part of it, I think, is that for them, it's a little bit of a Western mentality where if they want to come work in like Western countries, they need to be fluent in English. So they're just going to speak in English. And then if you go to private school that's taught in English all day long, they're reading and writing in English. So the reading and writing in Hindi for the students is not really up to par, because that's not what they're doing during the day. Usually I feel like whatever language you're reading and writing in school, that's the one that gets your brain starts to think in most. So the funny thing is, when I'm with the organization, the running joke with my guru is I don't understand his Hindi, and sometimes he doesn't understand my English because of my accent, the fact that I'm fast New Yorker, like speech wise, and so like that's the running joke. Although we do understand each other, and it's been just like a really beautiful thing that I started during the pandemic to get me through the pandemic, and that has literally flipped my life upside down and right side up and all that kind of stuff.
So you mentioned students, you talked about girls that you work with, and I know because you told me that you had the KIOO Project, and I would love to hear about how you got started with this project and the work that you do. And most of all, let us know where we can find you and how we can support your mission.
Oh my gosh, that would be amazing. So KIOO started because of the humanitarian work. Frankly, all of my work that I do now is started because of the humanitarian photography work that I do. And it was like a one-off idea in my mind. Like, giving cameras to kids is not a unique idea. Many people have done it. There was literally an Oscar-winning documentary done maybe 15 years ago by now about that idea. So I was just like, let's do it once. I found a friend of a friend of a friend who has a school in Haiti, which a country I've already worked in before. So I kind of knew what I was getting myself into by going to Haiti. And I grabbed 2 friends, asked them, like family and friends, to donate money to basically like an Indiegogo Kickstarter kind of campaign. And off we went. And we worked with child slaves in Haiti, which child slaves is sadly a big issue in Haiti. That's a taboo topic within the Haitian culture, but still very prevalent. And also kind of ironic considering Haiti is the only country to gain its independence through a slave revolt back in the
Right.
1800s.
Right.
And so we worked with them, and it was such a magical, powerful thing that that we all benefited from, but also the kids obviously did. And when we got back to New York, another friend of a friend had a school in Kenya. And so off we went to Kenya to run a workshop there. And then we came back to America again. And I was like, I feel like, are we like an actual nonprofit now? Because before it was just like a one-off thing, kind of thing. And then we looked at getting, incorporated officially with the IRS, but also like what was the benefits of our program and the way we were teaching it. And for some reason, the girls were just really blossoming our self-portrait assignment specifically. And it was just like the raise in self-confidence was just through the roof compared to the boys. Partly, I wonder if it's because the boys just started at a higher level in confidence than the girls. So like the leap just looked bigger for the girls because they had further to go than the boys.
Right.
So then, the team was like sitting around the table and we're like, well, maybe we just work with girls. And this was like 10 years ago. And I was like, I don't like that idea. I don't want to be a pink organization where we're founded by girls, run by girls, just for girls, the girls, girls, girls. So I was like, I don't like that idea. I'm like, boys still benefit. And I don't think it's wrong. I think it's wrong to leave one gender out, no matter what gender it is, And so I was like, well, what if we teach photography to girls and then the girls teach boys? Like, what happens then, And it was like one of those things where like, okay, this is either a terrible idea or like the best thing in the world, And we did our research to see if there was like a peer-to-peer gender teaching model that any other nonprofit had done that we can learn from. And we really couldn't find anyone. So again, we were just like, it's either because no one's tried this before or people have, and it bombed so terribly that no one wants to talk about it. So we were like, let's just try it once. And if it's great. And if it's not, we'll go back to our normal thing, which is teaching both girls and boys at the same time. And we went off to India, and it was amazing, where the results with the girls' confidence and also the boys seeing the girls in these leadership roles was just phenomenal. There was one boy, Rajas, who was known for being a bully. And the school had these bicycles that were donated by someone else and that kept breaking. The boys, and specifically Rajas, would be like, they didn't think that the girls should learn how to fix the bicycles because they just assumed girls would break them again. So what's the point? And so when it came time for him to be taught photography, I was like wondering who would teach him and all that kind of stuff. And the girls own the part of the workshop where they teach the boys. They get to decide what assignment they teach, what part of the assignment, what boy they teach, all that stuff. And so one girl immediately picked the bully to teach him. And I was like, that's interesting. And it was literally because she was like, I want to boss the bully around for a week. I was like, great, girl, you're going places. And so he learned photography from a girl. And then we found out from the school afterwards that when a girl explained math to him in math class, he listened. He went from literally not thinking girls should learn how to fix bicycles to being taught photography from a girl to being taught math from a girl. And I was just like, oh my God, this works, And so we came back to New York and we're like, I guess we are changing, gender equality through photography now. And so since then, we've run programs in Ethiopia, Uganda, Brooklyn, Nepal, just, a few months ago. And next up, we're going to be working with a Native American community here, which we're really excited about. And we're partnering with other organizations to run our programs internationally still. Because part of the thing is that we train the local staff to run the program. So then the organization can take it on themselves instead of relying on us always year after year coming in to teach the program, which I think is good for sustainability, but also for ownership, and the organization can take it on, so we're excited all about that. I know you asked about where people can find us. We're on Instagram, KIOO Project, KIOO Project. We're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff. But we're always looking for partnerships with nonprofits to run the workshop, because I think every community probably needs some gender equality work. We're always looking for corporate sponsors to donate to us. We're always looking for individuals, anyone who wants to support and work with us. We'd always gladly accept them.
I love that so much. Oh my goodness. I really do. I really think that, and when I was reading about KIOO Project and seeing that the switch is that you're having the girls teach the boys, I think is just like amazing. And the fact that you can see that from that one boy who started to realize like, well, the way I interpret it, it's like, oh, what a woman is saying is valuable. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
generation changing,
Mm-hmm.
and you're planting that seeds of change in the boys' minds that, women's voices are worth listening to. And that's phenomenal.
We tend to work with like pre-puberty kind of age kids, 11, 12 to 14, 15, because usually that's where girls lose their most self-confidence and where boys start really developing their views on women and girls.
Yeah.
And with this kid, and frankly, every boy that we've worked with, when you plant that seed early enough, like it kind of takes root now. Obviously, he's treating his female, classmates differently, but also hopefully that translates into the future when he starts interacting with his wife and his daughters or coworkers, because something got planted when subliminally or maybe not subliminally when he was younger.
Yeah. Generation changing work,
Mm,
I think.
yeah. Thank you.
I will add links to all those platforms in the show notes so
Mhm.
that people who are listening can click and find you all right away.
Thank you.
I'm psyched. I'm so uplifted by this conversation so far.
Oh,
And I'm so glad that we've had a chance to talk. This is
thank you.
amazing.
I can share one funny thing about language and words with KIOO Project.
Sure.
So KIOO means mirror in Swahili. So when we were incorporating, we were like, what do we name ourselves? We did like a whole naming exercise. I kind of liked having a name that was not in English.
Mm.
Frankly, URLs and social media handles for like words are really hard, or English words are really hard to find these days because they're all taken. But I also just loved being international about it. And so we made like a list of all the words in English that we liked and then translated into Creole because that was our first workshop, Swahili because that was our second workshop, and then Hindi and Gujarati also, since those are the language my family speaks. And we really landed on this word, KIOO, KIOO, mirror in Swahili, because it just like, I love the shapes of the letters and all that kind of stuff, but I didn't know how to pronounce it. Like Google Translate has like that robotic voice, which I was like, I don't know how much I can trust that voice. So I was like, I need someone who speaks Swahili. And so I was like, you know what? I should call the Kenyan embassy in DC.
Oh.
Someone there obviously speaks Swahili. So I called them up. And at the time, they had this automated thing, which was hilarious to me. Like, press 1 for the consulate's office, press 2 for, whatever, press 3 if you're a Kenyan in distress, press 4 for defense inquiries. I was like, what in the world? And then I was like, press 6 for general. I was like, I think this is a general question. 6, And this guy picks up who seems to have a Kenyan accent. I was like, hey, do you speak Swahili? He's like, yes. I was like, great. Can you tell me what the word in mirror in Swahili is? And he's like, KIOO. I was like, can you spell that? He's like, KIO. I'm like, can you say that again? He's like, KIOO. I'm like, great, thank you. I hung up. I was like, shoot, I forgot how he pronounced it because I was confused whether it's KIOO, KIOO, KIO. Like, I didn't know how, like, where the accent lied, And so call back again, general. I was like, the guy answers. I was like, hi, I just called you, asked you to say mirror in Swahili. Can you do it for me one more time? He's like, KIOO. And I was like, great, thanks. Hang up. And I was like, well, I need to check my sources. So I called the Kenyan consulate here in New York. Same thing, defense inquiries, Kenyan in distress, general, a woman answers. I was like, can you say mirror in Swahili? She's like, KIOO. I'm like, great. I hang up. Go back to my team. I was like, I have it confirmed by 2 people. It's KIOO. And then they were like, how'd you find out? And I would tell them. And they're like, did you tell them why you were asking? I'm like, no. I was like, they don't need to know. They need to think like some random woman is spamming them. Asking them, like, why is this woman asking for mirror in Swahili? I was like, I hope they talk about me at the Kenyan Christmas party.
Oh, I love that. Out
So,
here in the world, someone is telling that story. 2 people at least are telling that story.
From the other side of the story. Yeah. And they're like this weirdo woman.
No, but that's great. And it's hard to name something and find something that not only has that international feel that you want, but also is easy enough that can be said by people of different linguistic backgrounds. And it's not too much of an inside meaning, and it's, it's 3 letters, 1 letter repeated, but it's, I
Mhm.
like it. I like
Thank
it.
you.
And
Thank
now
you.
I learned the Swahili word for mirror, so
Yeah.
thank you.
And now you also know whenever you need any words translated in Swahili, call up the consulate office and press 6 for general.
Okay. We'll have to tag them in this episode so
Yeah.
that they can also promote this. Thank you for this conversation. I had so much fun talking with you.
I had fun talking with you. Thank you for wanting to have this conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I like to end each episode on the same question, just to have a little bit of fun. Not like we weren't having fun this whole time, but do you have any jokes, popular sayings, tongue twisters, cool slang words, idioms, words of wisdom, or words of advice in Gujarati to share and to teach us?
Oh gosh, I'm sure there is, but I think the funniest, so people will always be like, "Oh, say something Gujarati," kind of thing. And at first, I always got stumped on like what to say, like off the top of my head. So then I learned to have like 2 phrases like set, ready to go. So I'll tell you one of them. One of them is "Kutrono puchro bova varoche," which people are like, "What does that mean?" I'm like, "The dog has a hairy butt." I was like, so I know how to say that. And then the other thing I'll ask people, "Tanabuti biglageche," which means, "Are you scared of the ghost?" Weird question to ask someone.
That's so good. Are you scared of the ghost?
Yeah, which implies that there's a ghost around that you should be scared of, but I don't know if there is or
That's a really good question because it's disarming, like
Totally.
especially when you don't want to be asked that question and then you tell them and they're like, well, what does it mean? And then they're like, well, wait.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I'm sure that there's other things that when I hear them, actually, you know what? There's one thing that I actually love. Uh, it's just a word called Vali, kind of probably spelled it Vali, and it's a word that's really hard to translate simply because Vali means kind of like being like that gentle pat that a toddler will give to a newborn. So it's like when a toddler meets a newborn, that like their instinct is sometimes to like slap it, and so you just tell the kid valina apple. So it's like to give vali, and you only use it for like a child. You would never tell a grown adult to give vali to another grown adult or to a baby. It's literally just to avoid the toddler smacking the newborn. So it's a word that has a very specific reason to use it, and also use with only very specific people,
Bali.
Yeah.
I like that. Well, Babita, thank you again for this
Thank you.
conversation. I do hope we'll keep in touch
We will.
because we have, we have kindred energy, I think. Really quickly, before I let you go, if you've been having a conversation with someone for quite some time, you're enjoying the conversation, but you're about to go your separate ways. In Gujarati, what is the best way to say goodbye?
Aujo.
Aujo.
That means,
Aujo.
it doesn't mean goodbye. It's like see you later kind of thing.
Aujo.
Yeah. Aujo.
Perfect. Aujo. Babita. Thank you.
Aujo.
Thank you so much again, and I will be talking to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
New episodes of Speaking Tongues are available every Monday, 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to like and share episodes with other language lovers like ourselves. Ciao!